Thank you. Headmaster, headmistress, staff, fellow governors, parents, and most importantly, pupils. Thank you for the invitation to congratulate all of the many prize winners today and to give this speech. It truly is an honour to be standing here in the Philharmonic Hall, somewhere that brings back real childhood memories for me. Both listening to my father singing here as part of the Liverpool Welsh Choral, as well as sitting in these stalls for speech days over many years. Although I seem to recall looking up at the stage and thinking that the old geezer standing giving the speech was really, really old, which is slightly terrifying. I asked my sister, who was at the girls' school a few years after me, what I could possibly talk about that wouldn't send the audience to sleep and would get them between here and being able to escape for the rest of the day. Her advice was more a list of things to avoid, like not trying to embarrass myself by recollecting nightclubs that closed many moons ago. So, like many of the other speakers, I've turned to the school motto as somewhere to begin. And Concordia Parvae Res Crescunt is a useful starting point. My Latin was pretty poor when I was at school, and it certainly hasn't got any better. But I still recall the idea of small things growing in harmony. What I didn't realise, however, was that these four words are only part of the original quote from the Roman historian Gaius Sallustius Crispus's history of the Jugurthine War in 112 BC. Now, I'm fully expecting that having won the various classics or ancient history prizes, William, Ryan, Holly, and a couple of others will be able to answer all of your questions on this rather obscure war. But the gist of it was that Sallust believed that the ignominious defeat of the vaunted Roman army in North Africa foretold the downfall of the Roman Empire as a whole. Due to a few powerful aristocrats sacrificing the common interest of the people in favour of their own greed and political enhancement. And I'm sure there are no modern parallels to draw there. Sallust's belief was that groups are stronger than individuals when they share a common purpose. So his full quote of Concordia Parvae Res Crescunt Discordia Maximi Dilibuntur goes beyond the optimistic small things grow in harmony, but recognises that with discord, even great things will fall to ruin. At a time when there is so much change and discord, internationally, nationally, and even locally, or at least in the run-up to the Derby match next month, it's probably more important than ever to think about how we can all play our own part in growing in harmony. Now that might sound a little bit odd, given most of my working life has been in the military, but my own journey from sitting in those stalls, fretting about whether I was going to trip over my own feet, coming up onto the stage, to finding myself standing here now, is one of growing in harmony and avoiding discord. The gifts of a merchant's education are manifold, but with hindsight, I look back hugely positively on the teachers that made me think and go beyond simply what was required for exams, exploring my own reliance in doing a Duke of Emperor's Award, and both dislocating an elbow and getting concussed playing rugby, in the wrong game, on the wrong pitch no less, along the way. It was my time with the CCF, however, that perhaps shaped me most noticeably, setting me up for a career in the Royal Navy after leaving school. Following officer training at Dartmouth and then in ships around the world, I was then able to go on to Cambridge to read geography. And that allowed me to continue a love of maps and colouring them in. And if you're in a ship, it's always important to stay in the blue bit. And to think critically and to understand the why and not just how, which is so important for human behaviour and what goes on afterwards. So after 3 years of pontificating, rowing and playing football, I returned to a Royal Navy that underwent a seismic shift almost straight away. From the optimistic post-Cold War years that Francis Fukuyama had rather rashly called the end of history, to the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks and the response by Western democracies that dominated the next decade and a half of world politics. For my own part, my early 20s saw repeat deployments to the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Gulf, an amazing mix of swimming in the open ocean, sunbathing on tropical islands, but through to rapid roping out of helicopters as a boarding officer enforcing UN sanctions and preparing for the invasion of Iraq. Learning to lead sailors and marines many years older and much more experienced than me. After a period in Whitehall, I was promoted and returned to sea in a very old destroyer, quite literally a leaking rust bucket, with a shrinking number of sailors to motivate and focus on keeping the ship safe. Having just about avoided catastrophe there, my next challenge was to go up to Glasgow and help lead the very first ship's company for HMS Dauntless through the process of turning some hulks of steel into a living, breathing warship. And getting on for 15 years later, I'm very proud to see her in the Bahamas today, helping prepare the islands for hurricane season, having last week intercepted drug runners with over £140 million worth of cocaine. After my time in Dauntless, my career moved on to be more joint, working ever more closely with the Army and the RAF, delivering logistics support around the globe, whether that was chartering planes or ensuring that there were as many left foot size 8 boots as right foot size 8 boots available in Afghanistan, which is strangely harder than it sounds. I then joined an Army logistic brigade and deployed with them to Afghanistan for 6 months, managing the flow of people, food, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and very sadly, the critically injured and the fallen, in and out of a totally landlocked country, which is a hugely rewarding mental challenge for a sailor every day. After returning to the UK, I had the fascinating experience of joining the EU operational headquarters that was combating and eventually suppressing piracy off the Somali coast, before going on to lead the UK planning for a combined naval exercise in 2014 with the Americans, the French, and uniquely, the Russians. Sadly, but rather amusingly, we were in the middle of a very jovial planning meeting, not least as the Russians had been providing the vodka, when their KGB minders stepped in and announced that everything was off. Russia had just invaded Crimea. In a similar manner to the 9/11 attacks in 2001, the 2014 invasion shifted the geopolitical landscape and saw a resurgence in importance for NATO, and a need to capture the fast disappearing memories of how the UK had done things in the Cold War. And how were we going to do it with less than half the budget and less than half the people? In between all of this large-scale planning, I also led a team at no notice, in fact, missing my own birthday to the chagrin of my wife and daughter, to the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan to provide humanitarian relief in the face of utter chaos and devastation. Seeing how the UN, the Red Cross and myriad aid agencies can work together in some of the most challenging and distressing circumstances will remain one of the most formative moments of my life. The latter part of my career was a shift into Whitehall, working in a number of different government departments. Firstly, as part of the Stabilisation Unit, based in the Department for International Development, and then into the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, to be the lead on all civil military interaction, and an aim on how to make this work better in practice overseas. Whether or not that was successful, I have no idea, but it did involve short notice trips to obscure parts of the world that definitely do not make the top 10 list for places to visit. I was then back into the Ministry of Defence to lead on the international angle of logistics, working with our allies around the world to establish best practice and work out how we could support each other. That too came with lots of interesting travel, all over Europe, North America and the Far East, including inspecting an ammunition depot inside a mountain in the middle of China, a visit that also involved visiting the wet market in Wuhan, slightly before it became slightly more famous. And most recently working with the Treasury and 10 Downing Street on the pay for the entire armed forces, which involved briefing ministers, both the good, the bad and the distinctly interesting, on a weekly basis. My final appointment in the Navy was to be the Commander of Logistics of the then brand new aircraft carrier HMS Prince of Wales. I had over 150 sailors, marines, soldiers and airmen in my department, responsible for supporting over 1,600 on board, with food, accommodation, mail, pay, spare parts. In fact, everything that a small town with its own airport requires to survive. I was privileged to take her to sea for the first time under a white ensign, including a first visit to Liverpool, where we hosted over 20,000 people on board, and for her first overseas visit. Oh, and the small issue of COVID, where we were at sea and clean when lockdown first came in, unaffected by the toilet roll shortages that we saw on the TV news. So after 25 years, I made a complete shift from the RN to being the bursar at a school remarkably similar to Merchant Taylor's in outlook and size, and actually discovering that it is rather like life at sea, even if the average height is a little shorter. So, and you'll be pleased to know that we're almost at the end. What are the things that I've learned along the way? Organising yourselves is 90% of the challenge. An American admiral once couched it as, make your bed in the morning. And if you can do that, you're one step ahead for the rest of the day. Remaining calm under pressure and exuding self-belief helps everyone around you. I recall a dark night in the Arabian Gulf, many hours into boarding dhows breaching the UN sanctions in the last weeks before the invasion of Iraq. when I climbed back into the speedboat and the helmsman chose that moment to let me know that not only were we very short on fuel, but he didn't know where we were and that the compass was broken. In the pitch black of night, with the rack somewhere out in one direction and a ram in the other, and our frigate somewhere else, I was amazingly conscious of the 8 faces in the boat quietly looking at me to decide which way to go. And none of them for a minute considering that I didn't have a clue. Cheerfulness, therefore, is infectious, especially in the face of adversity. The Navy always used a dark humour as a coping mechanism, but it's based really on being able to rely on and work with the people around you. Because when it all goes wrong in a ship, it doesn't matter what rank you are, it doesn't matter what your role is, everyone ends up sharing the same life raft. So to do your job well, you need to engender respect. But to get respect from those around you, you've got to give it to others first. So for the pupils, you've got to be empathetic to what everyone else in your class is going through. That the teacher at the front might, heaven forbid, also have a life beyond the classroom. And when you're out in the big bad world, in whatever career path you choose, it is absolutely critical to get out and meet the people you're working with, to understand their point of view, understand their challenges. And I can guarantee that in return, that your success will be far easier if you can bring those around you on the same journey. In closing, I really would encourage you to pay only the scantest attention to the majority of what I've said. As some sage Roman once opined, Arbor tenus sapientis, wisdom only goes as far as the beard. Nevertheless, the experience of long months away at sea showed me that even when times are tough, the group will always be stronger than the individual. So if you can grow in harmony with your classmates, your future housemates, and future colleagues, you will avoid sallust, discord, leading to ruin. Work together, find points of common interest and approach, discover ways of working with someone rather than against them. Far more importantly, I must reiterate the congratulations for all of the prize winners, and my best wishes for all of you as you head on to an exciting future, whether that's the coming year at school, the next stage of your education, or exploring the wider world beyond. Thank you once again for the invitation.